Hello, hello, welcome. A very warm welcome to you, all the beautiful people that keep abreast with this program, Africa Rise with Susan West. I first want to apologize that we're starting really late today. It's it's one of the things that happen when you are broadcasting a live program, especially. And so my guest had other engagement, and he's finally here with us. So please pardon us. Yes. So today on Africa Rise, we will be discussing African heroes, the truth. African heroes, the truth, and trying to rub in minds on how we can come up with some kind of, agree on some kind of adoption of one language for all the African countries. I'm wondering how that is going to be possible, but I mean, those are the areas we're going to be looking at. So just give me a moment, Mama Africa. I'm so excited. And my guest today is Dr. Kambon. I'm going to bring him on screen and then I'm going to introduce him proper.
Me? Can everyone hear me? Can I be heard well?
I can hear you loud and clear. So just a moment. Your names are Okunini Obadele Kambon. Is that right?
Okunini is actually a title, right? So that's
really?
How you translate doctor into chi. And it's actually a war title that has been, now used in the academic sense. For Okunini, you can get an idea of the prominent one, someone who is prominent in war. And because I deal with intellectual warfare, we could definitely say that it applies in either context.
Right. Because you're a man of many facets, I would say. Could you I don't want to be the one to introduce you because there's just so many parts to you. Would you want to do us the honor of just introducing yourself as, everything that it's about Obadele Kambon, doctor, PhD.
Okay. And for those who are interested, you can just look on my site. It's obadelekambon.com. But, you had asked me before we went live, oh, am I African American? I say, no, I'm African anti-American. But one of the things about me, I'm the founder of abibitumi.com, which is where we teach various African languages. I also have an initiative called repatriatetogghana.com, where we assist Africans who are interested in repatriating to the continent. In terms of professionally, I received my PhD in linguistics at the University of Ghana in 2012. And I won the prestigious Vice Chancellor's Award for the best PhD thesis in the humanities in that year. I began my academic career and moved forward with that. In 2016, I won the Provost Publications Award for best article in the College of Humanities. I was for one dealing with language learning. And then also in 2019, I received the Nana Marcus Mosiah Garvey Foundation Award for Excellence in African Studies and Education. Also professionally, I'm a senior research fellow and head of the Language, Literature, and Drama section of the Institute of African Studies at the University of Ghana, where I teach several courses, including Asante Chi, which is the most prominent indigenous language of Africa, of Ghana, where we are. Also, I'm currently editor-in-chief at the Ghana Journal of Linguistics, as well as secretary of the African Studies Association of Africa. I played a major role in terms of Africans who received citizenship in Ghana, the 34 in 2016, and then the 126 in 2019. And as mentioned, now I assist others who are interested in repatriating to Ghana with repatriatetogghana.com. So that's, as I'll keep it there. I think everything else can just come up in the discussion, perhaps.
Right. You know what? There's just too many things that you do. I don't know how you do it. But just before we go into the topic of today, I just want to, ask personal questions. About you. I know you said you're anti-American. I don't know how you phrased it, but you're originally African American, what we call African American. But you're there on the continent of Africa, and you speak over 6 languages, and all apart from English language and Portuguese, as you mentioned earlier, are African languages. Do you want to educate us on how you're able to come from the United States of America, settle down in Africa, and you're able to speak all these languages, and how long it took you to master these languages? Because I've heard you talk in some African language. I'm not sure which dialect that was.
Mm-hmm. Very good. And when I use the term African anti-American, it's that we grew up already knowing that we're Africans, right? Mm-hmm. And if you even look back, many of us in the diaspora were referring to ourselves as Africans even before many on the continent began to start referring to themselves as Africans. So if you look at 1787, you had the African Lodge by Nana Absalom Jones, right? We had, the African, Methodist Episcopal Church, African this, African that. So the idea was that because we were coming from all these various ethnic groups, that we stopped identifying with, the ethnic, identity that we have previously, to understand, look, we're all Africans, right? So, and that's also why, the term Pan-Africanism was coined not on the continent, was actually coined by an African out of the diaspora in that exact same spirit, right? So when we grew up, we didn't grow up we never sung or stood for the national anthem of the United States of America, right? Mm-hmm. We never said the Pledge of Allegiance a day in our lives. We didn't celebrate any white horror days, as we call them. So we always practice African culture. So once you have this African identity, and like I said, it goes back, this understanding that we're all Africans, we can trace it at least in documentation going back hundreds of years. Right now, we're on the point on the continent where people are trying to get to a level of, look, we're all Africans. Mm-hmm. But I'll put it like this. I had a Kikongo teacher, and he was saying, for that purpose, many of you in the diaspora are more African than he said he himself was, because before anything, he would consider himself Nsundi. Before that, he is Bakongo or Mukongo singular. And then after that, then he's a Congolese citizen. After that, he's Central African. After that, then he's, continental African. And it's like he has to go through all of these hurdles before he comes to understand, look, we're all Black people, we're all African people. Whereas, on that side, it tends to be, not all, of course, because there's ADOS and all these other sellouts, that it tends to be, if you have any level of consciousness whatsoever, you will see somebody from Cuba and say, that's my brother. You'll see someone from Brazil say, that's my sister. You'll see someone from Nigeria and say, oh, that's my, cousin or whatever, because you're already seeing that all Black people are related to you in some way, shape, or form, as opposed to sometimes it tends to be, oh, those are Igbos. Oh, no, those are Yoruba. Oh, no, those are Hausas. Oh, no, those are Asantes. Oh, no, I don't speak that language. That's not my language. My language is Ga. And it's like, what? Right? So that fragment consciousness was removed from us, some of us, I'll say, by force. Some are trying to get it back again through fraternities, and these are alphas and kappas, or through gangs, these are Crips and Bloods. They're trying to get that back. But for those of us who have any type of African consciousness, we see ourselves as Africans first and connected to African people regardless of location, right? Yeah. So that's just a bit in how it ties to African languages, is that once you understand that you're an African, then you realize that all these languages are your language. Now, if I'm Akan, then my language is Akan, and later for Ga, later for Ewe, later for Yoruba, later for anything. But if my identity is that I'm African, then I come to Yoruba as, oh, why have I taken so long? This is my language. I should have been speaking my language a long time ago. I'll come to Asante like, oh, wow, what took me so long? This is my language. I should have been speaking my language a long time ago. I'll come to Wolof as this is my language. And there's a higher level of motivation when you actually understand that blood actually flows through your veins. Because you got places in the United States called Igbo Landing, for example. You have Congo Square. This means you had Africans from everywhere, coming to that place to understand, look, we're all African people. So by what means is this not my language? These are all my languages. So I speak Asante Chi, I speak Yoruba, I speak Wolof, conversational Kiswahili, also studied Kikongo formally. And then the other languages, I would say, number well over 100 in terms of those I can at least greet in or do something small in, Amarinya, Bamanakan, Igbo, like I can at least say something to you, right? Hausa, Pular, like all of these languages, like I never sat down and counted them all. But anytime I meet someone, I'm like, teach me something about my language, not your language, my language, our language, right?
Absolutely.
That's how I was able to learn those languages.
That's fabulous, fabulous. How long did it take you to be able to master these languages? The reason I'm asking, because of course we know that it's when languages are easier learned when you're very young. After a certain age, it becomes a struggle. I remember as a child, I had Ghanaian teachers back home in Nigeria, and some of the words that was taught to me as a child, still it's in my brain somewhere. It just comes out. But as an adult, I've been trying to learn other languages, and I know how much I've struggled trying to, remember even these words. And here you are coming from the United States of America, and you've mastered how many languages, especially African languages? How long did it take you to master these languages? And because I want you to encourage everyone in the diaspora and even on the continent, because we have a disease on the continent where we thought it was an elite thing to only speak English language and want to belong, or just belong with the people who have great command of the English language. And I'm one of the people that have come to that realization of how much we have cheated ourselves. So how long did it take you to master these languages, and how would you encourage Africans on the continent and in the diaspora to embrace African languages regardless of where they come from?
Very good. I'll give you the dates where I started studying them formally. So for Chi, I started studying Chi first informally on my own in '98. And then I started studying it formally in 2000, 2001. I spent that entire academic year at the University of Ghana in a study abroad program. And because I had already been studying it formally, I was already conversational. So it was a study abroad group, but they said, well, for you, you already know the language. Like I could do everything in the language at that point. They said the main thing for you is pronunciation, right? Because you're learning it from a book, so the tones and all these other things, you're not getting it like, if you were just growing up as a native speaker on the street. So because of that, I was able to have private classes with Okunini Obadele, one of the, luminary scholars of linguistics here at the University of Ghana. He's also a Professor Okunini Obadele. So with that, I was able to just sit down, and what we would do, we would read Anansi stories from beginning to end. So I'm like reading it out loud. He's correcting me on my tone or, my pronunciation or anything like that. And that really got me, it really took me leaps and bounds beyond where I would have been able to, be on my own. And then also so that was first semester. Second semester, I took it with Okunini Obadele, and he was teaching us Asante Chi and Ekwapim Chi. And with that, I was taking the class with native speakers who have been speaking it their whole lives. So we were reading poetry and Asante Chi and Ekwapim Chi. We were reading proverbs. We were reading plays, like every genre you can imagine, novels, every genre. And then we would write essays on those in Chi. So it was a serious leap up, right? And I remember the final project was the longest paper I had written in any language up to that point in time. It was 41 pages, entirely in Chi, about proverbs in various social contexts, like in Nyumkro and in, Adinkra and so forth. So that's that. For Yoruba, I started studying in 2002. Now, I initially wanted to learn isiZulu. This was at University of Wisconsin-Madison. And my idea, I had read that the Asantes had beaten the British in war. I had also learned about Isandwana, where the Amazulu were able to defeat the British again. So my idea, I wanted to learn the language of all the people who beat white people in war. And I'll combine all of those and, use it as a powerful weapon to take the war forward. But unfortunately, that semester before I came was the last time they offered isiZulu. So my options were Yoruba, Hausa, Kiswahili, Sudanese Arabic, and I think maybe but all of them had significant Arabic influence. Right. And I said, I'm not trying to leave English to go get some more Arabic. So that's why I chose Yoruba, because it was the most African in the sense of less Arabic or English influence out of all of them. Right. So I started studying that in 2002. And it was interesting when I started studying that. So I graduated from undergrad in 2002, and one of the instructors, when I went to visit Wisconsin-Madison, She said, unfortunately, we're only teaching intermediate this coming semester. So you can go to a summer program, which is like, I forget, like 6 weeks or something. But she said, there's no way that you'll learn Yoruba enough to be able to, enter that intermediate class. So you can try your best, you can do whatever, but that it's impossible for you to get intermediate level in just these few weeks. You can't be done. And at that point in time, I knew Bawuni, and that was all. I didn't even know what the response was to Bawuni. I just heard somebody say that before. So that was that. But I said to myself, this woman has no idea who she's talking to. She has no idea. So I went to that summer program. By the time I came back for the OPI, that's the oral proficiency interview, at the end, she and Iafatuyi, they said, oh, we want you to assist the other students to in the intermediate class. So it went from it's impossible for you to get intermediate level to now I'm basically the de facto TA for the Yoruba class. And then by the end of that school year, I actually became the TA for Yoruba. So I taught the intro Yoruba and the intermediate Yoruba myself. Yeah. And I spent, summer in Yoruba studying advanced Yoruba, and that was intensive, going all throughout Yoruba land. And just like with the Chi, every genre. So we read poetry, we read prose, we read plays, we read everything. We read Essay-Fa or Dui-Fa, like everything. And that was with Odogban, Olabode. So that was very, very, very helpful. I started studying Wolof around the same time, first informally, and it was with another graduate student named Serif Korea. And he's from Senegal. And I just made this vow. This is my language, right? So I said, we're never going to speak to each other in English. That's my vow to myself. We will never speak to each other in English. So that means I got to do some work because I got to get up, my Wolof skills. And what really motivated me with that was because I remember one day at Whole Foods, which is a grocery store in the United States, there was a brother who was a cashier. And he said to my father, we were all standing in line, he said, you look just like one of the elders from my village. You look just like one of the elders from my village. And my father was like, well, where are you from? I'm from Senegal with Wolof and so forth. So I said, that's on my list, Wolof. We got to get some Wolof in here. Just this offhand comment, I said, got to get Wolof. Right. So I started, me and Sharif, we used to just meet at this local, sit down coffee shop, whatever it was. And anytime I would come, we would just start speaking in Wolof. And that was it, no English whatsoever. And every time I came, I had a Wolof dictionary and like some other material. So every time I came with like 20 new sentences. It's like, who's teaching you? Like, who's your teacher? Who's your teacher? And I was like, yo, cassette, like just you, like only you. So he was just, flabbergasted, but that was it. And it was actually 2 or 3 years before I remember we were in like a mixed setting and I heard him speak English to somebody else. And I said to him in Wolof, like, I think this is the first time I've heard you speak English. And we just like kind of remarked about that. I was like, yeah, so I definitely stuck to that. And then I started studying formally at that same summer institute with Fanta. Fanta, what was her last name? Her last name is escaping me. Jamaica. Like I have to come back to it, and it's a shame that that's not coming to me right now. But I started studying that formally as well. I started studying Kikongo formally, and that exact same thing. So I was running them both side by side. And what I was doing, because I already knew Wolof, I was taking my Kikongo notes in Wolof, right? And what I found is that there were so many similarities between Kikongo and Wolof that was just mind blowing. So like, for example, the word for a student in Wolof is ndongo. You could say janga kat, but that's kind of like a count. But if you say ndongo, that's a student. But then in Kikongo is ndongo kolo. So the same ndongo is ndongo kolo. And I found so many of these correspondences, even more between Wolof and Kikongo than I did between Wolof and say Yoruba or Wolof and Akan. So that's even some research I'm going to do more, on, because in the oral history of the Bakongo, they say that they come from a place called Kainga, and that place Kainga is still in existence in modern day Chad. So this lets you know that most likely in that Sudanic belt, the Wolof speakers may have had some type of interaction with those who are now Kikongo speakers, and maybe they migrated. So that's all a hypothesis. Definitely in the oral tradition, I can say that they say they come from Kainga, which you can still find on Google Maps in modern day Chad. The Wolof people, they branch off from the Fulani speaking people. There's that oral tradition. So definitely in that Sahel belt, there was some type of interaction that I'm interested in doing more research on. What other languages? So Portuguese, I got that because I started studying capoeira back in the 90s, like around 99, somewhere thereabout. And I was so resistant because I was like, I'm not trying to get another, Eurasian non-African language. But, there's a lot of the oral history of how they fought against the Portuguese and defeated the Portuguese there in Palmares and all these things. So that's what really got me, motivated. So I have a paper. You mentioned something that I say is one of the great myths about language learning, which is that, once you get to a certain age, you can't learn it. And that's the one that I won the Provost Award for the best publication in the humanities. And you can find it on my site, obadelekambon.com under publications. And it's called Theory of Endogenous and Exogenous Motivation in L2 Migration. Now, let me break that down. Basically, it's talking about motivation as the number one factor in terms of language learning success or language learning failure. And in that regard, what you'll see is that the more languages that you know, the better equipped you are to learn more languages. And you can get more of those languages the older you are. And I'll give you an example that what I used to start learning Yoruba, and I remember like it was yesterday, my teacher was also a philosophy student. This is at Michigan State University in that summer program I mentioned. So he wanted to start off with, these abstract concepts of what is truth and what is love and what is all. So I was like, okay, cool. So the first word he taught us was otito, which is truth in Yoruba. And it actually comes from thought, which is like to point in the straight direction. So tito is like that act of pointing straightness. So the idea of truth is that which is not crooked and bent, but that which is straightforward, right? So that's otito. So I was like, how can I remember that word? And I was like, okay, I got a strategy. I'll think about it like Michael Jackson always lies, but Otito Jackson, he tells the truth. So that's how I remember the word. It was a mnemonic device. Because I already knew English, it's not that I'm learning new information and new knowledge, it's that I'm connecting the new knowledge to old knowledge. I'll never forget that word. And that's still, now I don't need to pull up that mnemonic device, but that's how it never escaped me. And the more ridiculous the mnemonic device is, the easier it is to, retain that word, retain that sentence, retain that proverb. And I did the same thing when I was in Ethiopia learning Amarinya. And there was someone who was like, he had taught me the word for beauty. There was a beautiful woman or whatever. He's like, he said the word konjo. So I was like, okay, how can I remember this? I can say, okay, you know what? There's a guy named Joe who has a beautiful, girlfriend. And if I ever want to talk to her, then I need to con Joe. I need to con him into going somewhere else. Oh, Joe, go over there. Come. And then now I'm a beautiful woman. So I'm going to con Joe. So that's what I used to remember, conjo. So now I won't forget that word again. So it's not that I'm not gonna, hit up Joe's girlfriend or anything, right? But it's just such a ridiculous scenario that how can you forget this word? So anytime I'm learning a new language, these are some of the strategies. So now when I know Yoruba as well, this helps me to now learn Kikongo, right? Because I'll use my knowledge of Yoruba to now come up with these same type of mnemonic devices for Kikongo. Absolutely. When I know this for Kiswahili, now I can use this for Wolof, like all of these things. So that's why I say it's every language that I've learned, and I've learned it to the point that I'm teaching the languages at the university level at University of Ghana, right? I'm teaching native speakers of the language, their own language, right? Oh, wow. So the way I was able to do that, and I learned all of them as an adult. I didn't learn any of them as a child. I didn't even know that these languages existed as a child for the most part. So I learned all of them as an adult, and this is the method. So when people say it's difficult to learn these languages, once you're advanced in age, it's because they're not going about it the right way. They're not connecting the new knowledge to the old knowledge.
So basically, we learn to create shortcuts especially when we're not babies anymore, shortcuts in using almost like sight words for little babies in your mind. You create words that remind you of. So let's go into the main topic of today, which is African heroes, the truth. and adoption of a common African language for Africans on the continent and, of course, in the diaspora. First, I want to read this. It's there is a book called African Heroes and Heroines by Carter Godwin Woodson. It states that in the first chapter, it states that neither Europeans nor Americans, as a rule, endeavor to tell the truth about Africa. Most foreign writers produce such accounts as supports their religious propaganda and the program of the economic imperialist. Now, it brings me to saying, you know so much about Africa. You're studying about the everything that concerns Africa. I want you to begin to educate us about the truth about the African heroes, i.e. Nelson Mandela, Kwame Nkrumah, Robert Mugabe, Julius Nyerere, Marcus Garvey, Patrice Lumumba, so on and so forth. So you just take it away.
Very good. Now, in your list, I would say that you've listed famous African people. Some of them are heroes to different degrees. Some of them maybe are villains, but we won't go into that so far right now. But I'd like to share my screen very quickly, if I can, because I did a presentation on decolonizing the academy, and I actually started with a quote from Nana Carter G. Woodson. Can you see my screen?
No, I can't. Hold on.
If you can enable it.
Just give me a moment.
No problem.
Yes, I can see your screen now.
Okay, very good. And there's a quote, this is from Miseducation of the Negro, which is the more famous of his works. And he says, every man has two educations, that which is given to him and the other, that which he gives himself. Of the two kinds, the latter is by far the more desirable. Indeed, all that is most worthy in man, he must work out and conquer for himself. It is that which constitutes our real and best nourishment. What we are merely taught seldom nourishes the mind like that which we teach ourselves. Now, I give this presentation in front of a packed audience, right? This is around the time where we had Gandhi Must Fall and all these things. So literally we had standing room only there at the Institute of African Studies. And there's a quote that I will say is ascribed to Nana Harriet Tubman, even though the actual primary source text from contemporary to her hasn't been found. So some say it actually starts in this 1993 text. But either way, it's powerful. She says, I freed thousands of slaves. I could have freed thousands more if they had known they were slaves, right? Yes. Now in this, what I did is I would ask the students, and it's interactive, right? I would ask the students in terms of history, the oldest historical text known is from Nesubiti Scorpion, right? King Scorpion as he's known. And also one of the most profound historical texts is from Nesubiti Jehuti Mes. And I would ask the people, how many of you have ever heard of Nesubiti Scorpion? And none of the hands went up. I said, how many of you have ever heard of Nesubiti Jehuti Mes? 0 hands. But then I asked them, have you ever heard of Herodotus? All the hands in the auditorium went up, right? And I'll say, okay, well, we're actually doing a fact-finding mission, right? To find out where exactly we are. And I said, how many of you think that this is a problem that this ancestor, and let me even make this presentation mode so you can see it well, who is obviously an African, right? He looks actually just like me from profile. Maybe I should turn to the side. That, you know, how come you don't know your own African ancestor who inscribed historical text for you in stone, but you know a random white man, right? 1,000 years after you know the random white man. What's going on, right? And then, you know, from there, we also went into divine savior and monotheism. So the story of Jesus is actually coming from the story of Heru, right? The death and resurrection of the savior. The idea of so-called monotheism is made most popular in classical times by Nesubiti Akhenaten. But how come all we know is the Cesare Borgia image and the so-called white Jesus, which is just a plagiarism of the life story of Heru, right? So I asked them, how many of you have ever heard of Heru? 0 hands. How many of you have heard of Akhenaten? I think 1 hand went up, 2 hands. And those are like former students of mine. I said, how many of you ever heard the name Jesus? Every hand in the auditorium goes up, of course, right? I said, you know, I think this tells us about why we don't know about our own heroes, but we know about every random white person who sneezed, right? I say in terms of multi-genius, Imahu Imhotep, right? 2650 BCE, this is over 4,600 years ago. I said, how many of you are ever heard of Imhotep? One hand went up and said, yeah, that was the villain in The Mummy. He was a killer. He wanted to rape him. So I said, what? Right? Apparently there's some Hollywood movie where they use the name of one of our greatest, most esteemed ancestors as some psychopathic killer, right? What does that do to your mindset? Imagine if you did that with the Arabs and with Muhammad or something, right? They would bomb you, right? But these white folks will take the esteemed name of our illustrious ancestor and make it some type of villain in, basically some Hollywood flick, right? So I asked them, how many of you have heard of Imahu Imhotep? Almost none. I asked, how many of you have heard of Einstein? Every hand goes up, right? What do we know about our own heroes and what do we not know, right? We went into Imahu Hesi Ra, who is often credited as the first physician in history, right? I asked, how many of you have heard of him? 0 hands, 0, not a single hand in the auditorium. And you look at him, he's still got his Afro puffs, right? He got, the big Afro here. He got his features. This is an African, if there's ever been an African. If he ain't African, then none of us are African, right? None of them have heard of him, but they heard of Hippocrates. Now, Hippocrates worshiped in the temple of Asclepios, which is just the name for Imahu Imhotep that we just mentioned before. So he himself never called himself a father of medicine. He actually worshiped the Africans as the actual fathers of medicine, right? But nobody had heard of them. When we go to writing and philosophy, here we're dealing with our heroes, right? We talk about Nesubiti Harjadef, right? 4,500 years ago, nobody had ever heard of Imahu Harjadef, which is the first fragmentary book in the history known to human beings, period, right? That's a pretty important person if we're being objective. They've never heard of him, but I asked, how many of you have heard of Socrates? Every hand in the auditorium goes up. What's really going on, right? Then we went to Aset. This is the original virgin birth to the divine savior Heru that we spoke about before. I asked, how many of you have ever heard of Aset? Nobody. I said, have you heard of ISIS? They're like, oh, that's the Islamic extremists, right? I said, no, that's not ISIS. That's not what we're talking about. But this image, I think really encapsulates it, where we say that so-called Jesus image is stolen, plagiarized from. So this is your hero. You're praying to this little imaginary white boy on a stick, and you don't have any idea that it actually is just a plagiarized story of Aset and Heru, right? So what are we really talking about when we're dealing with heroes? When we come to Kadgimni, this is the second oldest text. It's a fragmentary text as well, over 4,000 years ago. I asked, how many of you have ever heard of Kadgimni? Nobody, right? And when you look at him, these are the photographs, right? And it's very clear why these, white Neanderthals don't want us to see the photographs, because as soon as you see them, you're like, this looks like my cousin Ray Ray, right? This looks like right? This looks like a brother down the block. Hold up, what are you talking about? So you see all of these Africans who look just like everybody in your family reunion, and that's why they'll show you gods of Egypt and Prince. Wait, I don't even know what these things are because I don't look at those, and the Mummy and all these types of things. So nobody had heard of him, much less had they read him. It's not enough to say, oh, I've heard of my great hero. Well, what did he write down, right? So we have to actually read those texts because they're very important texts because they deal with philosophy, they deal with writing, they deal with statecraft, they deal with ethics and morals and interpersonal relationships and all these things, political science, and we've never even heard of them. But I asked them, have you heard of Plato? As you can well guess, every hand in the auditorium goes up. What really goes on, right? We went into Imahu Ptahhotep. Now, this is the oldest surviving complete text known to humanity on the entire planet Earth. So that's pretty important, right? And this is Imahu Ptahhotep. I asked, how many of you have heard of Imahu Ptahhotep? They said, oh, bless you, did you sneeze, Ptahhotep? I said, no. This is your illustrious ancestor, the author of the oldest known book in the history of the entire planet Earth. Wow. And when you look at him, that's the reason why you don't know his name, because he looks exactly like you, right? He got the locks and everything. Look to the side, man. Look at the profile view. If that is not my ancestor, I ain't got no ancestors, right? But nobody had heard of him. But then Shakespeare, all the hands come up. I say, why do you know of this syphilitic, psychopath, from the butt crack of Western Eurasia, but you've never even heard of one of the most important human beings ever to walk on the planet Earth. I say there's something going on with your miseducation, as Nana Carter G. Woodson mentioned.
Right.
When we talk about Wenice, this is the oldest spiritual text known on the entire planet Earth, the compendium known as the Pyramid Text, which all the other spiritual texts, including the Bible, including the Torah, including the Quran, all of them plagiarized from them. If you have any text that talks about death and resurrection of the Savior, this is where they're getting that from. If you come across any text that's talking about Judgment Day and any of these things, this is where they get that from. They didn't pull that out of the air. They didn't get that from any ghost or angel coming down. They stole it because this is carved in stone. And you can actually go and read it right now, right? The Pyramid Text. And this is a reference for anyone who wants to read it in translation there at the bottom, the ancient Egyptian Pyramid Text, and there are several versions. Now, when you come to the King James, every hand, people put both their hands up. Oh, hallelujah, right? This is what's going on. I say, how come you don't know the author of the original, but you know the plagiarist? What's really going on here, right? Yeah. We went into Imahut Pesachet, the world's first known female physician on the entire planet Earth. The first known female physician on the entire planet Earth. Nobody had heard of her, but I asked Florence Nightingale, every hand goes up. I was like, how do you even know this, right? Where did you even get that from, right? So we went into Nesubiti Mary Carre, which goes into human nature and social relations, where it talks about, lo, the miserable Eurasian. He's wretched because of the place he's in, short of water and bare of wood. His paths are many and difficult because of mountains. It goes on and on into the reason why these white folks, these Eurasians, these Arabs, and all these others behave the way they do is because of their environment. Now, later on, Marx would talk about, the reality creates the context, and the context creates the reality and the conditions and all these. He's talking about the effect of the environment on the human being. And we're writing about this 4,000 years ago to describe the racial relatives of Karl Marx, right? So talk about the Johnny-come-lately, as far as this goes. Just about 4,000 years ago, we're talking about the impact of environment on human behavior. And we've never heard of Imahut Mary Carre, who the instructions of Nesubiti Kheti are delivered to, but we've heard of Karl Marx. How can you have heroes? How can you even think your life matters if you don't know that you've ever done anything in your entire life? How could you? And then we continue, we went into Nesubiti Sobek Neferu, the first known, without any dispute. There are some, in the so-called Old Kingdom that is disputed, was this an actual historical personage? This one is completely undisputed. And this is Nesubiti Sobek Neferu, the first female ruler known, undisputed in the entire history of the planet Earth. And I asked, how many of you have heard of him? I'm like, ladies, have you never even heard of the first female ruler in the history of the entire planet Earth? No hands. You got all these people who are doing gender, right? All these ladies, gender, maybe one day we'll be president of Ghana. Maybe. I say, how come you don't know the heights to which you attained in the past? And I ask, have you ever heard of Queen Elizabeth? Every hand goes up. I say, look at this. Look at this. How can you not be an alienated psychopath if you don't know anything about your ancestors? For every white girl who ever tripped and fell down, you know her name. What's really going on here? We come to Imahut Sanhat. This is one of the most famous literary texts from classical Kemet. As how many of you have ever heard of Imahut Sanhat? Zero hands. So how many of you have read it? Of course, zero hands. If you never even heard of it, how can you read it? But this is a text that's actually been translated into various African languages as well, where you can read that piece of literature. Nobody had ever heard of that. But then I asked, how many of you ever heard of Homer? Oh, yeah, I heard of Homer. I learned about it because of Homer Simpson. I'm like, what? What are you talking about, right? So how can you know that you have heroes when you know every white person who tripped down and fell, but you don't know any of your ancestors? And I went to Nesubiti Hatshepsut. Nobody had heard of her. And I'm like, this is ridiculous. But then I asked, have you ever heard of Queen Victoria? All of them. Now, Nesubiti Hatshepsut is probably the most effective ruler, period, but definitely the most effective female ruler in the history of Kemet, right? In terms of political science, in terms of statecraft, in terms of her famous voyage to Punt, all of these things that she did, her massive building projects in Jessaru, nobody had even heard of her, but all of them heard of some, This looks like Miss Piggy. I don't know if you grew up with the Muppets. This looks like Miss Piggy over here. All y'all know Miss Piggy, but you don't know Nesubiti Hatshepsut. I was like, what about, have you ever heard of Himnesut T? None of them have ever heard of, Himetnesut T. And I'm like, what in the world? She was so prominent that when her husband, who they referred to as Amenhotep III, when he was later in advancing age, all the other rulers would address their letters directly to her. So she was de facto running the entire state of Kemet. And Kemet means land of black people, for those who don't know. That's what the fraud, fake white Egyptologists call ancient Egypt. We didn't call it ancient Egypt, we called it Kemet. And the most important thing about Kemet is that it means land of black people. And when you look at her, she looks a lot like my wife, who's sitting over there. She don't like when I say that, but she looks just like, Carla, can you look over here? If she was wearing glasses, this is the same woman, right? Reincarnated. And I look a lot like Nesubiti Amenhotep, but we'll leave that for another discussion about reincarnation.
Right.
But I'll digress. Again, when we talk about peace, the very first peace treaty in the history of the world, which is actually a replica of it, is found at the UN. So these white folks know what's up, but they're just not telling us about it. The very first peace treaty in the history of the entire world known is housed right there at the UN, and it's by Nesubiti Ramesu Usur Ma'at Rasa Tepenra, who the whites like to abbreviate down to Ramesses II. It's like, what? You're losing all of the power of that name. And then when you come to Nesubiti Akhenaten, he was known for peace, right? People in contemporary times refer to him as the Prince of Peace, where he had all these boundaries, Stella, which you can read. I've read them, where he says, I will not go beyond these boundaries. I'm just staying in here. So he basically eschewed war, right? He's not going to go forward with all these belligerent campaigns. He's devoting his entire life to the Aten, right? This is what we're talking about when we're talking about peace, but nobody's heard of either of them, but everybody's heard of Gandhi, right? This pedophile, this is him. He used to sleep with these young girls in his own family to test whether his penis would get hard when he's sleeping with them. And he would write down, oh, my penis got hard again last night. Oh, I'm such a sinner. Oh, blah, blah, blah. It's ridiculous. When you read, people read his autobiography, they don't read his collected works. And you can read the 100-volume series. You can read the 100-volume series. It's everything that he ever wrote. It's every letter to private correspondence. It's every newspaper article. It's all of his texts. And you can read his diary entries where he's talking about he's sleeping with his niece and oh, the member got hard again. Oh, and that's before we even deal with how he fought in the war against the Zulus, right? That's before we even get into how he agitated for the segregation of the Durban post and telegraph offices so that the Indians don't have to go through the same entrance as the Kafir blacks, right? This is before we even go into how even when he started his agitation campaign, he got put in jail. He agitated to have separate lavatories from the black people. That's where he said after his so-called epiphany that he wrote about in his autobiography, it's after that epiphany that he said black people live like animals. They're 1 degree removed from the animal, right? This is enlightened Gandhi, right? Yeah. This is what people know about, but they've never heard. So I said, how come we don't have a statue of Nesubiti Ramesu Usur Ma'at Rasa Tepenra, but right there on campus at the University of Ghana, we got a statue of this pedophile who said in life he doesn't want to be around the Kafirs. He said, why do they keep dumping down the Kafirs in the Indian section of town? That's what he wrote, right? Right. So if people are interested in reading more, you can look at these references. Everything that I got the references for, scholarly text. Now, when people talk about the world as round, everyone talks about Galileo Galilei. Oh, look at these brilliant white people. They're talking about the world is round, blah, blah. Now, you have to go to the Metropolitan Museum in New York to find one of the first descriptions of the world as round, a good 1,800 years before there was anything called a Galileo. And it's carved in stone, right? A depiction of the world as round before there was anything called Italy, right? And what's so unfortunate is you got to go through these white people and pay an entry fee at the Metropolitan Museum to even say it. So these white people know about the depiction of the world as round. They got it, right? It's right there carved in stone, but they're just not telling us about it. Meanwhile, they're hailing, look at this random white guy, this pedophile, child molester, I don't even know. He looks like somebody who would just grab a little kid up in the bush and start doing, random things. We don't even want to deal. And now this is one of the main psychopaths in history that people know about. This Christopher Columbus, right? And I asked people, how many have ever heard of that? Every hand go up. And I asked, how many of you have ever heard of Nana Abubakar II? 0, right? Now, when you read the documentation of Al-Omari, who interviewed Nana Mansa Musa when he was returning from Mecca, he said that the way he became the Mansa of Mali is that his maternal uncle abdicated the throne after taking a fleet of 2,000 ships, 2,000 for the soldiers and then others for victuals across the Atlantic Ocean. And this is what they left, carved in stone. Look at this brother with the features. Look at the afro, right? Now, they like to show you some of the other ones. They'll say, oh, that's the indigenous people. There ain't no indigenous people of the United States or Central America or anywhere else that got afros, right? This is what they call El Negro. And this is what these cave species Neanderthals found when they started digging right there in Central America, at Tres Zapotes, at La Venta. So this is what we carved in stone when we went there. Africans with African features and with afros, right? El Negro, as they call it in Spanish, right? But we've never heard of that. When we go to the first free republic in the West, everybody heard of this, psychopath George Washington, but no one had ever heard of Nana Gaspar Yanga. And it would interest people to know that the United States is still not a free republic because according to the 13th Amendment, it says slavery nor involuntary servitude shall exist within these United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction, except whereas the party has been duly convicted of a crime. That caveat means that you can be enslaved as long as we convict you of a crime, which means that you don't actually have to do a crime. There just has to be white people who said that you did so, right? So the only free republics in the Western Hemisphere are the ones established by Black people, like Nana Gaspar Yanga, like Nana Ganga Zumba, like Nana Zumbi dos Palmares, right? Those are the free republics where they abolished enslavement. They have no caveats of, oh, well, only after a crime. No. But we've never heard of any of those names. And I'm talking about in that meeting, in that presentation, I asked people, I said, who has ever heard these names? And people who tried to fake like, oh, I heard it, I said, well, tell me about them. I say, see, you're lying, right?
Yeah.
But then, of course, this George Washington, everybody had heard of them. And they actually have a class in the history department at University of Ghana where the students have to memorize every president of the United States from beginning to end. Now, I was born and raised, my ancestors were enslaved in the United States. I never had to memorize that. But here in Ghana, all of the students in that class have to memorize every president of the United States from beginning to end and what they did, what they're known for, and every, head of state of Russia, right? The czar of this and, all these random, whatever white folks who I don't even know. And I'm like, what is really going on? How can you not be a psychopath if you that's all you know? When we talk about women warriors, we talk about Nana Amani Sheketo, right? We talk about Mwene Njinga Mbande. They've never heard of them. You can read Black Women in Antiquity by Nana Ivan Van Sertima if you want to know more. But all of them have heard of Joan of Arc. What's really going on, right? We went to Nana Jean-Jacques Dessalines, one of our greatest warriors in terms of military acumen in the entire history of the Black race. And I say, have you ever heard of him? No. I say, have you ever heard of Napoleon? All the hands go up. I say, they fought against each other in war. How come you only know the loser and you don't know the winner? Right. Is it because the winner is Black? And is it because the loser is some type? I don't even know if we can call him white. He looks like a shaved pig or a shaved dog, right? What is this we're looking at on the right-hand side? But for those who are interested in more, you can read The Irritated Jane. And really, when I say this, it's halfway in jest, halfway serious, but we have to take these random white people off of their pedestals, right? So when I'm saying this, it's kind of tongue-in-cheek, but really, I'm saying this in the sense of we have to take these white folks off their pedestals. You know the losers, you don't know the winners. And one of my students, and I'll close on the hero section with this. This is one of my students, Aiki Nono, who just launched Alavanyo, which is a documentary where we go into some of these same topics. But this is another documentary she put online called Unsung Legacy. Yeah. And it's that it goes to exactly this. We don't know about our heroes. We know about everybody else's, pedophiles, right? And I'll play this very quickly. I hope you can hear it. Can you hear that?
No.
You cannot?
I can't hear.
Yeah, let me switch to my speakers and then we'll come back here. So hold on 1 second. I have to go to my Bluetooth speakers and you will be able to hear it. I'll enable those. And I appreciate your patience because I think it'll be worthwhile.
Okay, that's all right.
Okay. And there may be a slight echo for a second, but it won't last for long. I'm going to come back to presentation mode.
Yes, Helen D.
Can you hear that now?
Have you ever heard of Julius Caesar?
Yes, Julius Caesar, yes, I have.
Julius Caesar, yeah. Julius Caesar, yeah.
Oh, of course.
Of course.
What of Imhotep?
No, I haven't.
Imhotep, never heard.
Imhotep.
No,
I don't think so.
I don't think so.
No, I've not heard of it. What is that?
What? Huh?
No,
No. What?
no, I haven't heard of it.
Right. And this is just to the exact same point. This is at the what's considered to be the most esteemed institution of higher learning in Ghana, right? And these are the not only students but even professors. They've never even heard of one of the greatest heroes in the history of the entire Black race. Never even heard the name. To the point, what is that? What? Huh? Is that a new chocolate bar? What is that? What? Huh? They've never even heard of him. Not like they can't articulate all of the acts that he did as vizier, right? Chati, prime minister, in addition to being an architect, in addition to being a physician, in addition to being, right, everything that you can imagine, right? These medical texts, these mathematical texts. This is why he's known as the first multi-genius in the history of the entire world that we know about, right? They've never heard of him. It would be bad enough if like, oh, I can't go deep into what he's about, but yeah, of course I've heard of him. But they know Julius Caesar, what's really going on, right? So Nana Carter G. Woodson said, those who have no record of what their forebears have accomplished lose the inspiration which comes from the teaching of biography and history. So they can't be motivated, they can't be inspired to be anything but an imitation of some random white person. Because if you think white people are the only ones who ever done anything, then how can you aspire to be anything but some white person, right? Oh, I want to be like the next Jesus. I want to be like the next Napoleon. What? Right? Are you serious? And then Nana Renoko Rashidi says, what you do for yourself depends on what you think of yourself. And what you think of yourself depends on what you know of yourself. And what you know of yourself depends on what you have been told. So because we haven't been told about ourselves, it means we don't know very much about ourselves. Because we don't know very much about ourselves, it means we don't think very much of ourselves. And you can see this in the corruption. We talk about, oh, our leaders are corrupt. How did they get that way, right? That's the end result of an intentional and calculated process to create these anti-Africans who we call misleaders, right? That's not by happenstance, right? They've been created to think that they themselves as Black people are worthless, and the people who they're supposed to be leading are also worthless. So I might as well just get my, little dollars in my foreign account and go hang out with white people because they're the only people who've ever done anything of value, right? So, and then because we don't think very much of ourselves, we don't do very much for ourselves. So when we see the light off going on, we think, oh, well, that's all we can do. We see these rough roads. Oh, that's all we can do. We're worthless. We've never done anything. And I've actually had a student at African Studies tell me that if not for white people, we would be monkeys swinging in the trees.
That's sad.
This is from a student at African Studies. And these are the most, I would say, blackened students on University of Ghana campus. And this is what you get from them. Are you serious? And in Wolof, we say, which is self-knowledge is better than being told about oneself, especially when we're being told about ourselves by our enemies. And that quote is actually from Nana Kwa David Whitaker, but Dr. Renoko Rashidi, Okunini Renoko Rashidi is the one who's popularized it. And what we say is that, we talk about so-called Black Lives Matter movement and so forth, but what we say is the police kill the living, but the scholars kill the dead. There's the idea that a person is not truly dead until his or her name is forgotten, right? But isn't that what happens when the names of all of our most illustrious ancestors are forgotten? They're actually being killed by these scholars, right? So the police are killing the living by putting their knee on our neck, but the scholars are killing the dead by erasing their memories, right? But some of us engage in intellectual warfare, making sure that their lives live on. So we talk about Nana Amon Kote, who did the seal of the Republic of Ghana. People in the audience didn't even know who that was. We talk about Nana Theodosia Salome Oko, who made the flag of Ghana. We talked about Philip Beho, who composed the national anthem of Ghana, or Mako Kwame Bojo, who put the lyrics to it. And then the Right Honorable Nana Marcus Mosiah Garvey, who contributed that black star to that very flag. So when we talk about the black stars, people say, oh, it means hope. Oh, it means, I say, what? You don't know where that comes from? Are you serious? They have no idea, right? I asked my students this. So according to Nana Malcolm X, Baba Omowale, he says, no matter where the black man is, he will never be respected until Africa is a world power. And this is what we really have to get to.
Absolutely.
And I think I'll close on this. There's a lot more I could go into.
Okay, can you just hold
But I hope that's been helpful.
Just hold
Yes?
You're not closing yet, because I just wanted you to do as much as possible with, educating us. But we're going to come to the second part of our discussion today, which is, of course, we're running out of time. So you're going to take that real quickly. It's about adoption of a single language or a few languages as official languages for Africans. And in your experience as someone who has learned so many different languages, there is a viewer here who, first, let me ask you, do you know about the Ijos? The Ijos?
Yes.
Right.
Southeastern Nigeria, correct? Mm-hmm.
Well, you could call it that, South. There is Wilcox Promise, who is watching. He says, good evening, Susan. I would love to find out more of the Ijo history, Grand Bonny Kingdom, Brass and Calabari. I don't know how much you know about the history of this place, but if you could just touch it just a little bit, and then you can go on and talk about what language you would think will work perfect as a language that is adopted for all of Africa.
Right, I can't go very deep into Ijo history because it hasn't been a research topic for me. But what I would say that, the best way, this is what Nana Carter G. Woodson said in the presentation, that whatever you're interested in researching, he, gave it to us that we have two educations. So if you found that you went to school and you haven't been given, that education about the Ijo history like you wanted, then it's really up to you, right? So again, he said, every man has two educations, that which is given to him and the other, that which he gives himself. So, my research interest has been very broad, but it hasn't taken me there. But just because of this question, I will actually, look up more on that. So I will not speak on any subject that I have not researched into, right? In depth. So I'm familiar with the Ijo people, but I can't really go into the depth of their history, so I will not try. But I will encourage that listener to please start doing your research. There's so much online. There are so many PDFs that are in the public domain, things that were written in the 1800s, 1900s. I believe The West and the Rest of Us by Nachin Wezu, he actually goes into how Grand Bonny Kingdom was eventually overpowered by these brutish people. Some call them British, but he goes into the brutish people. And he actually goes in depth. I can actually speak a little bit about it, but he goes into how the brutish people would use all of these different humanitarian excuses. Oh, these people are savages. Let's go in and save them from themselves. And he actually goes into how those rulers were subverted by them, right? So if you're interested in learning more, I think a good place to start is The West and the Rest of Us by Nachin Wezu, because he speaks specifically, on the Ijo people and some of the pretenses that these Sam-Eurasians did, just like they did in Benin to overpower them, just like they did. They would say, oh, those people are doing human sacrifices or whatever. And then they say, all right, so now let's go wipe them out. Let's go kill every adult that we can get our hands on. And I'm like, how is that a solution? Right? Meanwhile, they got the death penalty. Meanwhile, they're tarring and feathering people, up there in Britain. Meanwhile, they're lynching people. But they come to us to save us from ourselves. So, that's a pretense. You can read more about that there and look at his references, because that can lead you to other research as well.
So can you quickly go into African languages? There are thousands of African languages and, of course, dialects, and you speak a few. But in your experience as an expert in African languages, what would you say that if Africa wanted to come together and adopt a common African language, what would be that language? Or should?
Very good. Right. What I'll say is that there have been several proposals on the table as far as this goes. Some have advocated regional languages, like Professor Kwesi Kwa-Pra. So he is out of Ghana initially, but he's based in South Africa, where he talks about these 18 or so language clusters, which are these huge language clusters where there's mutual intelligibility. So for example, you have the Mabia languages spoken in northern Ghana into Burkina Faso and so forth and so on that are mutually intelligible. The greetings are very much similar. And, you know, right now, as it stands, they're regarded as separate languages, right? Where you say, oh, you have the Dagomba language, you have this, you have that, you have Mora, you have so forth and so on. But what he says is that because there's so much mutual intelligibility, we should look at this as a continuum, as a cluster. You can see the same thing in terms of the Gbe languages, right? You have Fongbe all the way in Benin, all the way to Ewe in Ghana. And I was talking to my younger brother, not biological, my younger brother in Benin. I said, oh, the sister Ayeki, she has this film, Alavanyo. He says, oh, that's just like in Fongbe, where they say Elevanyo. It was like something very, very similar to it. And it's like the same language spoken hundreds of miles away. But, you know, it's like this continuum of languages. So the way our white colonial enemies like to do is they like to segment it like it's a line, right? This is Ewe, and beyond that line, that's the language. Everything else is some other language. But when you look at it as a continuum, when you look at it as a cluster, you can even go all the way from the Gbe languages to, like, say, Yoruba language, and you'll find so many of these similarities. So it's a continuum. Look at it like a rainbow, right? That's going across there. And when you see it like that, that's one way of looking at it. So that's one proposal on the table in terms of adopting more or less regional languages and harmonizing the orthography, the writing system, because the way the French will, you know, write something with the OU, and an Anglophone, quote unquote, country will just be with the U. And then, you know, you go to a Lusophone country, they represent it, you know, different, however. So it's like, you know, you can't even get the sense that it's the exact same language, it's the exact same word in this cluster, because the representation in the orthography, it obfuscates things more than it lends to clarity, right? So that's one. Another proposal is like adopting one language, like, for example, Kiswahili, right? Or some would say, all right, let's use Kiswahili in East Africa, let's use Hausa, or maybe one of the Mende languages, or one of the Fula languages in West Africa. Hausa tends to be at the forefront of that discussion. But generally, some may even say, you know, Kiswahili for all of Africa. And that's been proposed, official language of the AU, so forth and so on. Now, when we're dealing with that, you know, I'll just say that that's another proposal. Some who have challenges with that talk about how Arabized the Kiswahili is. So you have all of these, you know, first Waswahili culture is heavily Arabized, and then the language itself in terms of the lexicon. Definitely where it comes to a lot of the, you know, the syntactic structure, morphology, all of this is definitely African. And even when you come to a lot of the proverbs, like I have an article called Chiswahili or Kiswahili that shows you can find the exact same proverb in Chi that you can find hundreds of miles away in Tanzania in Kiswahili spoken there. That shows that there's a common worldview. I have another article coming out on body part expressions. Again, it's looking at Akan, Kiswahili, Yoruba, and Medu-Necha, right? And it's showing how in all of these languages, when you want to express a concept of courage, for example, in Yoruba, you could say Olaya, which is literally he or she has chest, right? Is to say that person is brave, right? And the same thing in Chi, you say Nekokuyedru, right? And you could call it Akokudru, heaviness of chest, is to say that person is brave. In Kiswahili, you say Anamorio, he or she has heart, right? So it's like the same type of concept. It's not an abstract thing where in English, courage is like, what does that even mean? If you're a native speaker, you could go into the etymology and say, oh, well, God is coming from French, but you don't even know that. It doesn't make any sense to you as a native speaker of English, right? But in all these languages, the worldview is such that it's tied to not an abstract concept, but whatever the part of the body that experiences it. So that's another, you know, proposal on the table, I would say. Another proposal is reinvigorating the language of Ro and Kemet, which is written as Medu-Necha, right? Divine words, what they call hieroglyphs, right? Now, one reason why this is proposed is because it won't lend itself to quote unquote tribalism. Where in Ghana, it's such a problem to elevate Asante Chi, for example, which is by far spoken more by first language speakers as well as second language speakers, and it's a default lingua franca, right? But if you propose to make that the lingua franca or the official language, everybody comes and say, that's not my language, that's not my language. So you get into so-called tribalism. And it happens because there are very few Africans in Africa. If there were any Africans in Africa, they would say, oh, I'm Ebe, but Chi is my language too. It's an African language, therefore that's my language. But because there are so few Africans in Africa, they say, oh, that's your language. My language is Ebe, and that's your language, right? This lets you know that we don't have very many Africans here. Because if we did, we wouldn't have Yoruba versus Hausa. You wouldn't have Igbo versus, all this stuff that we deal with all throughout the continent. Hutus versus what? Right? What? There aren't very many Africans. But once we start to be African, then you say, that's my language too. We would rather all suffer under the oppression of English rather than elevate any single African language to be that lingua franca. So what Ro and Kemet does is that it circumvents that, because that is the language of all of us. And the research done by Tate Theophilo Minga, he shows that you can find the same word in Ro and Kemet, right? What they call, quote unquote, ancient Egyptian in Igbo. You can find that exact same word in Yoruba. You can find the exact same word in Chi. You can find that exact same. And an example of that would be, let's say, for example, Abe in Chi is palm tree. That existed in Kemet, so they had the same word as Bae in Medunecha. And then in Yoruba, it's Okwe. And then you go to the Bantu languages, and it's always something like Ba or Bae or something like that. And it shows you this continuity. And you can actually linguistically apply the comparative method to see how here there was a devoicing process that now made it a P instead of the B. Here, that devoicing process didn't take place, so it's still a B. Here, there's a labial velarization, and you can actually document that systematically to show how every single language has transformed slightly or retained that original consonant as it was in Medunecha, right? You can even use that to reconstruct spoken Medunecha. And this is what the speakers of so-called modern Hebrew did, right? You have Itamar bin Abi. And what happened is that his father isolated him so that he didn't get exposed to any language other than Hebrew, right? So he wasn't allowed, his mother wanted to sing Russian lullabies to him, and his father about went upside her head, bow, don't ever say any word other than Hebrew to my son. And because of that, that's the reason why Israel speaks Hebrew and uses modern Hebrew and writes modern Hebrew. Now, when we get serious is when we will start to do that with our children and say, Ro and Kemet is the only language spoken in my household, and my child isn't allowed to hear anything else. Because of that, that's why Israel is what it is. And the only way that we will get global Kemet, the land of black people, is when we do a similar thing. So that's another proposal on the table. Others will say, oh, it's too difficult. Oh, we can't. And it's like, this is what it boils down to. There are several proposals on the table, and I've just given some of the prominent ones. There are other created languages like Afrihili, which was like a combination of Akan, for the most part, in Kiswahili, and other things. And that's what I would say is that what it boils down to is whoever puts in the most work, that's going to be the proposal that carries the day. If the ones who say Ro and Medunecha is what we should use, if they put in more work on the ground, like what happened with Hebrew, and isolate their children, or like what's done with this Esperanto, you have all these communities. It's a made-up language, right? All these quote-unquote Romance languages, Latin-based, whatever, they are speaking that language. So if the Ro and Kemet people put in more work, that's what's going to carry the day. If the Kiswahili people, Hausa people put in more work, or Kiswahili alone put in more work, that's what's going to carry the day. If the language cluster people put in more work, that's going to carry the day. For me, I would say that I would strive towards Ro and Kemet, right? To get past all of this, whatever. So my children, every morning, they get up and they transcribe Chi, they transcribe Yoruba, and then they also transcribe Medunecha, right? So I guess I'm more or less hedging my bets, right? But they do it every single morning, right? When we get up, we pour libations, right? So we do it alternating between Chi and Yoruba, and then we'll also mention the Necheru of Kemet, right? So I have Amen, Amenet, Nun, Naunet, Kekeke. So we're actually bringing in all of these different aspects of it, and it's a real lived thing in our household. So in our household, I've never spoken to my children in anything other than African languages, not a word. I would be disgusted at even the prospect of uttering a single word in any of these Eurasian languages. So in our household, the official languages are Chi and Yoruba, right? My wife, however, speaks to them in English, right? And this is every day. This is everyday battle because I always encourage her not to speak to them in English, but rather speak to them in Yoruba. But I won't go far on that because she's doing like this to me, and that means we're gonna have a problem. So I won't go far on that. But this is a constant struggle. So they speak, of course, English because that's my wife's native language, her first language, the language to which she has emotional attachment. But they also get the G, they get the Yoruba. So it's not a thing of choosing one single language, right? They've been exposed to Kiswahili as well, right? Even though it's not the official household language. They're also exposed to, you know, Kikongo as well. They're exposed to Wolof as well. We do that as a subject.
Well, Dr. Kambon, because our time is fast spent, I just want you to tell the viewers how they can contact you. For those of us listening who are interested in learning African languages and perfecting, some of us need to perfect. And so how they can contact you real quickly.
Very good. So my main site is abibitumi.com. Abibitumi, that's ABIBITUMI, Abibitumi. And that is our social education network, right? So I'm not on Facebook. You'll never find me there. I'm not on Twitter. I'm not on Instafool. I'm not on, you know, any of these places. I'm only on the one that is by and for Black people. And I would encourage all your listeners to quit supporting and financing our enemies who take that exact same money to build the prisons and buy the bullets that shoot us down the streets, and to start supporting your own, which is abibitumi.com. We also use that as the platform. Exactly. And Abibitumi is Chi for Black Power. Abibitumi, Black Power. Another one of my personal site is my first name, last name.com. ObadeleKambon.com. So you can check me out there. And the spelling, you can, of course, see it right there. Another one of my sites is Abibitumi Kasa. And that's the main one for language learning that we're relaunching now. And we plan on having every single language spoken in Africa represented as a class that we teach there. Right now we have Chi, we have Medunecha, we have Kiswahili, we have others, but we want every single language to be represented there. And then finally, we have repatriateToGhana.com. So it's not enough to be speaking African languages. Meanwhile, you're living, you know, with the enemy, aiding and abetting a criminal murderer like the United States. What you should do is divest from America and invest in Africa to make Africa great again. And we assist Africans with that with repatriateToGhana.com. REPATRIATE, repatriate TO2 Ghana, GHANA.com. So you can check us out through any of those. So hit me up. I'd love to see you. And Madame Susan West, I want to see you on Abibitumi. I've come to StreamYard, which is not African owned. So in the spirit of reciprocity, I want to see you on Abibitumi.
I promise you, I will be on Abibitumi. Seriously. But just before you go, there is a song I learned in primary school, and it is I think it's Ashanti. I'm not so sure. I don't remember what it means, but I just want to show off because I can't speak the language, but I can sing in the language, and it is Yame Osahe Amayina Kotono Meso Mekotono Bina Mebo Nodida Yame Osahe Amayina Kotono Meso Mekotono Bina Mebo Nodida Yame Wodide Mende Enti Mebo Odinankra Mansa Yame Osahe Amayina Kotono Meso Mekotono Bina Mebo Nodida. And I'm clapping.
You have a beautiful singing voice. That's a beautiful singing voice. I've never heard that song before, but you sing it and it makes perfect sense. So Nyame Osahene, so that's Onyame. It's like the war general, Osahene. Momayen Kotono, which is let's kneel down for him, her. So no is gender neutral pronoun. And in traditional African thought, we conceived of the creator as having both feminine and masculine aspects. So that's that. Miso Mikotono, which is I will also kneel down, also, like kneel down for him. And I will Mebonidinda, which is I will also mention his name every day, his/her name every day. Again, it's a gender neutral pronoun. So it's I've never heard the song before, but you sing it, you know, it's a very nice song. And it makes perfect sense to anyone who understands, you know, Asante Chi.
Right. So thank you so much, Dr. Kambon. Thank you for honoring our invitation to come on Africa Rise. And God bless you. Take care.
Medasi.
Oh yes, it was quite educative. Like I have to go back and also watch this broadcast because there's so much I want to learn as well. And for everyone else who joined us, Helen D, thank you always. Twinkle Oriwariye, my guy, yes, thank you. And Wilcox, and I also have who is it now? Thank you for all of you who joined and who shared this broadcast. This is something that we cannot buy with money. But one thing we have to walk away with from today's broadcast is the fact that we have to now begin to embrace every African language you come across. Like, this is not the time to be ethnocentric about your language sounds. This is not the time to make jest of any African language. Any African language is your language as long as you're African. Let's teach our children to speak African language. I have failed in some areas and I'm trying to, because I'm beginning to speak my language, my dialect to my children, even though I live in London. So please, let's do something. Let's make sure that we're proud of the languages that we have on the continent. We have beautiful culture and language. Let's promote our language. And thank you to Dr. Kambon, who's come here to, you know, to, what's the word now? It's gone off the roof. Anyway, to help us understand the importance of speaking our language. And of course, you can contact him and learn and find out how you can clean up on your African languages. Thank you so much for joining us. And of course, in our usual way, I will announce who the next guest is as we go into the week. Thank you so much and God bless you all. Take care. Good night.